From a desperate 9-year-old mail-order bride to an all-powerful 6'4" Old Town queen. Her secret, the rifle barrel, pressed cold against Martha's temple as she stood in the dusty street of Copper Ridge. She was 19 years old and had been in town for exactly 3 hours. The man holding the gun was supposed to be her husband? "You ain't what I ordered," Henry Blackwell snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey.
The agency said, blonde and quiet.
"You got red hair, and I seen you talking back to the stagecoach driver." Martha's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "Put the gun down and we can discuss this proper." Henry laughed, a cruel sound that made several townspeople turn away. "Discuss? You're going to do what I say, or I'll send you back in a pine box." A shot rang out. Henry's gun flew from his hand and clattered into the dirt. Martha spun to see an older woman standing on the porch of the general store, a smoking revolver in her weathered hands. "That's enough, Henry," the woman said. Her silver hair was pulled back tight, and her eyes were hard as flint. "Go sleep it off." Henry clutched his bleeding hand and stumbled away, cursing. The woman holstered her gun and walked toward Martha with measured steps. "Name's Dorothy Kane," she said. "I own the general store, the boarding house, and about half the land around here. You look like you could use a cup of coffee." Martha nodded, still shaking. "Martha Collins. I came from Boston to marry that man." "Well, you won't be marrying him now," Dorothy said flatly. "Come on." Inside the store, Dorothy poured coffee from a pot on the stove. The place smelled of tobacco and leather and something else Martha couldn't identify. Through the window, she could see Henry being led away by 2 men wearing deputy badges. "He does that to every mail-order bride," Dorothy explained. "Tests them. Sees if they'll break. 4 girls have come through in 2 years. 3 went running back east. 1 married him anyway and disappeared 6 months later." "Disappeared?" Martha's cup rattled against the saucer. "No one asks questions in Copper Ridge," Dorothy said. "That's the first thing you need to learn." Martha set down her cup. "Then why did you help me?" Dorothy studied her for a long moment. "Because you didn't cry, you didn't beg, you looked him in the eye and told him what to do. That takes sand." "What happens to me now?" "That depends," Dorothy said. "You can take the next stage back to Boston, or you can stay here and work for me. I need someone who can read and write and keep ledgers. I need someone who won't fold when the wind blows hard." Martha thought of Boston, of the cramped tenement where her mother coughed blood into handkerchiefs, of her father who drank away every dollar. She thought of the agency woman who had smiled like a snake and promised a better life out west. "What's the pay?" Martha asked. Dorothy smiled for the first time, showing teeth. "Room, board, and 10% of store profits. But there's more to it than that. This town needs changing, and I'm too old to do it alone." "What kind of changing?" "The kind that makes men like Henry Blackwell afraid instead of women like you," Dorothy said. "The kind that puts real law in place of whatever the ranchers want. The kind that means when a woman disappears, people ask questions." Martha picked up her cup again, her hand steady now. "When do I start?" "Right now," Dorothy said. "Henry's going to come back when he's sober, and he's going to want blood. We need to be ready. How do we get ready for that?" Dorothy walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out a key. Inside were 3 more revolvers and boxes of ammunition. "First I teach you to shoot. Then I teach you everything else." Martha stood and walked to the cabinet. She picked up one of the revolvers, feeling its weight in her hand. It was heavier than she expected and cold as iron. "I'm ready," she said. Dorothy's smile widened. "Good. Because in Copper Ridge you're either the wolf or the sheep, and I don't work with sheep." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the desert. Thunder rolled across the empty sky. The next morning, Martha woke before dawn in a small room above the general store. Her fingers were blistered from loading and unloading the revolver Dorothy had given her. They had practiced until midnight, Dorothy showing her how to draw, aim, and fire in one smooth motion. Martha had hit the target twice out of 20 tries. "That's better than most men their first night," Dorothy had said. "You got good hands." Now Martha dressed quickly and went downstairs. Dorothy was already behind the counter, writing in a leather ledger. "We got a problem," Dorothy said without looking up. "Henry's brothers rode in an hour ago. All 5 of them. They're at the saloon across the street, drinking and planning." Martha's stomach tightened. "What do they want?" "You," Dorothy said simply. "Henry told them you made him look weak. His brothers are meaner than he is and twice as stupid. They think if they run you out of town, it proves something." "What are we going to do?" Dorothy closed the ledger. "We're going to open the store like normal. We're going to show them that threats don't work on us, and if they try something, We're going to make them regret it. The morning passed slowly. Customers came and went, casting nervous glances across the street where the Blackwell brothers' horses stood tied to the rail. Martha kept the revolver in her apron pocket, her hand never far from it. At noon, the saloon door swung open. Henry and his brothers walked out into the bright sunlight. They lined up in the street facing the general store. "This ain't good," Dorothy muttered. She moved to the door and stepped outside. Martha followed. The oldest Blackwell brother, a giant named Frank with a scar across his jaw, called out, "Send the girl out, Dorothy." "This ain't your fight. Everything in this town is my fight," Dorothy called back. "Go home, Frank." "Can't do that," Frank said. "Henry's got a right to his bride." She signed a contract. "The contract's void," Dorothy said. "He threatened her with a gun. That's against territorial law." Frank spat into the dirt. "We don't care much for territorial law out here." "You know that." Martha felt the weight of the revolver in her pocket. Her heart hammered, but her breathing stayed even. She stepped forward, standing beside Dorothy. "I'm not going with him," Martha said, her voice carrying across the street. "And if you try to take me, someone's going to die." The brothers laughed, but it was a nervous sound. Frank's hand moved toward his gun belt. "Don't," Dorothy said quietly, but her voice cut through the laughter. "You draw on her, you draw on me." "And you know what happens then?" Frank hesitated. Everyone in Copper Ridge knew Dorothy's reputation. She had killed 3 men in the past decade, all of them in fair fights, all of them cleared by the territorial judge. "This ain't over," Frank said finally. "Henry's got rights." "Henry's got nothing," Dorothy said. "Now get off my street." The brothers didn't move for a long moment. Then Frank turned and walked back to the saloon. His brothers followed. Martha let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "That was close." "That was just the beginning," Dorothy said. "They'll try again, probably tonight when it's dark. We need help." "Who's going to help us against the Blackwells?" Dorothy smiled grimly. "More people than you think. The Blackwells have been running roughshod over this town for years. Lots of folks are tired of it. They just need someone to stand up first." That afternoon, Dorothy closed the store early and took Martha to a small church at the edge of town. Inside, a woman named Claire was sweeping the floor. She was about 30, with tired eyes and bruises on her wrists. "Claire," Dorothy said, "we need to talk." Claire set down the broom. "I heard what happened." "The whole town heard. Will your husband help?" Dorothy asked. Claire laughed bitterly. "Paul won't stand against the Blackwells." "No one will." "Then we do it ourselves," Dorothy said. "You, me, Martha, and every other woman in this town who's tired of being afraid." Claire's eyes widened. "You're crazy." "Maybe," Dorothy said. "But I'm also right. How many more women have to disappear before we do something?" Claire was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "What do you need?" "Spread the word," Dorothy said. "Every woman who wants things to change should come to the store tonight after dark. Tell them to bring whatever weapons they have." By nightfall, 12 women had gathered in the back room of the general store. They ranged from Claire's age to old Betty Morrison, who was 70 if she was a day. Some carried revolvers, others had rifles or shotguns. A few just had kitchen knives. Dorothy stood before them. "The Blackwells are coming tonight. They want Martha, but really they want to prove they still run this town. If we let them take her, nothing changes. But if we stand together, we can end this." "They'll kill us," a young woman named Lucy whispered. "Maybe," Dorothy said. "But I'd rather die on my feet than live one more day on my knees. Anyone who wants to leave can go now." No shame in it. No one moved. "Good," Dorothy said. "Here's the plan." The Blackwell brothers came at midnight. They rode up to the general store with torches, thinking the building would be empty. Instead, they found every window lit and every door barricaded. Frank Blackwell dismounted and approached the front door. "Dorothy, send out the girl!" A window on the second floor opened. Martha appeared, holding Dorothy's rifle. "Go home," Martha called down. Frank laughed. "Little girl, you don't even know how to use that thing." Martha fired. The bullet kicked up dust 6 inches from Frank's boot. He jumped back, cursing. "Next one goes through your leg," Martha said calmly. Windows all around the store opened. Women appeared in each one, armed and ready. The Blackwell brothers looked at each other nervously. They had expected to face Dorothy and one scared girl. Instead, they faced an army. "This is madness," Frank said. "You women don't know what you're doing." "We know exactly what we're doing," Dorothy called from somewhere inside. "We're taking back our town. Now ride out or start shooting. Your choice." For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then Frank climbed back on his horse. "This ain't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Dorothy replied. "It's been over since the moment Martha Collins stood in that street and didn't run. You just didn't know it yet." The Blackwell brothers rode away into the darkness. Inside the store, the women cheered. Martha lowered the rifle, her hands finally starting to shake. Dorothy appeared beside her, resting a weathered hand on her shoulder. "You did good, girl. What happens now?" Martha asked. Dorothy looked out at the empty street, at the town that had just changed forever. "Now," she said, "we build something better." 2 weeks after the standoff, the territorial marshal arrived in Copper Ridge. He was a lean man named Jack Porter with cold eyes and a reputation for fairness. Dorothy met him at the edge of town. "Heard you had some trouble," Porter said. "Trouble's been handled," Dorothy replied. Porter studied her. "Heard it was handled by a bunch of women with guns. That true?" "Every word." Porter smiled slightly. "The Blackwells filed a complaint. Said you and some mail-order bride threatened them." "That's a lie," Dorothy said flatly. "They tried to kidnap Martha Collins. We defended her. All legal and proper." "I'd like to hear the girl's story," Porter said. Dorothy led him to the general store where Martha was organizing inventory. She told Porter everything, her voice steady and clear. When she finished, Porter nodded slowly. "The contract Henry Blackwell had was illegal anyway," he said. "Man can't order a bride like she's cattle." The territory's been trying to shut down those agencies for years. "So what happens to the Blackwells?" Dorothy asked. "Nothing, unless Miss Collins wants to press charges for assault." Martha thought about it. She remembered the gun at her temple, Henry's whiskey breath, the fear that had gripped her. But she also remembered what Dorothy had taught her about power and how to use it. "No charges," Martha said, "but I want the contract declared void in writing. And I want it posted at the land office so everyone knows." Porter raised an eyebrow. "That's smart thinking." "I'll make sure it's done." After Porter left, Dorothy turned to Martha. "Why didn't you press charges?" You had him dead to rights. Because charging him makes him a victim," Martha said. "But voiding the contract makes him a fool. Every man in 3 territories will know Henry Blackwell couldn't keep his mail-order bride. That hurts worse than jail." Dorothy laughed, a real laugh this time. "You're learning fast, girl. Maybe faster than I did." The months that followed brought more changes to Copper Ridge. The women who had stood together that night formed a council. They started meeting weekly at the church, discussing problems and solutions. Claire's husband Paul attended the first meeting, sullen and angry. He left the third meeting, nodding agreement with his wife's suggestions. Martha took over the store's bookkeeping and discovered Dorothy was richer than anyone knew. The old woman owned not just property in town, but shares in 3 silver mines and a railroad spur. "How did you get all this?" Martha asked one evening as they reviewed the ledgers. Dorothy poured them each a whiskey. "Same way you're going to get yours. By being smarter than the men around me and never apologizing for it." "Tell me," Martha said. Dorothy settled into her chair. "I came west in '49 with my husband. He was hunting gold. Found some too, a decent claim up in the hills. But he got sick that first winter. Pneumonia. Before he died, he signed everything over to me. The other miners tried to take it, said a woman couldn't own a claim." "What did you do?" "Hired the meanest lawyer in San Francisco and fought them in court. Took 2 years, but I won. Sold the claim for enough money to buy half this town. Then I started buying the rest, piece by piece. Every time a man got drunk and gambled away his land, I was there to buy it. Every time someone needed a loan, I gave it to them at fair interest. 30 years later, I own more of Copper Ridge than anyone else." "Why didn't you just leave?" Martha asked. "You had enough money to go anywhere. Because leaving would have meant they won," Dorothy said simply. "And I don't lose." Martha understood. She had learned in these months that power wasn't just about money or guns. It was about refusing to back down, about building something that couldn't be torn apart by threats or violence. The Blackwell brothers left town in spring. Frank sold their ranch to Dorothy for half what it was worth. Word spread that they couldn't show their faces in Copper Ridge after being run off by women. It was a stain that followed them wherever they went. Henry left last, alone and bitter. He stopped at the general store on his way out of town. Martha was behind the counter when he walked in. "You ruined me," he said quietly. "No," Martha replied. "You ruined yourself when you put that gun to my head." I just made sure everyone knew about it. Henry left without another word. Martha watched him ride away and felt nothing but relief. That summer, the Women's Council convinced the town to hire a proper sheriff, one who answered to the people instead of the ranchers. They built a schoolhouse and hired a teacher from Denver. They established rules about property rights and fair wages. Slowly, carefully, they transformed Copper Ridge from a place where might made right into something resembling civilization. Martha's role grew with each passing month. She negotiated contracts, settled disputes, and managed Dorothy's expanding business interests. People started coming to her with problems, knowing she would listen and find solutions. On Martha's 20th birthday, Dorothy gave her a gift, a 10% stake in everything the old woman owned. "You've earned it," Dorothy said. "I'm not getting any younger. Someone needs to know how to run things when I'm gone." "Don't talk like that," Martha said. "Hush," Dorothy replied. "I'm 64 years old and I've been shot twice. I know my limits. You're going to outlive me by decades, and when you do, I want you to keep building what we started." Martha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Dorothy had become more than a mentor. She was family. That night, Martha walked through Copper Ridge's streets. She saw the new schoolhouse, the improved roads, the houses that had been repaired and painted. She saw women walking alone after dark without fear. She saw children playing in streets that used to run with blood and whiskey. She thought about the terrified 19-year-old girl who had arrived here with nothing but a fraudulent contract and a carpet bag. That girl was gone now, replaced by someone harder and smarter and infinitely more capable. Martha Collins was no longer a desperate mail-order bride. She was becoming something else entirely, something powerful and dangerous and necessary. And this was only the beginning. 5 years passed like water through fingers. Martha was 24 now, no longer the frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach. She wore fine dresses from San Francisco but kept a derringer in her pocket. Her red hair was pinned up in the style of Eastern ladies, but her eyes were hard as the desert sun. Dorothy's health failed slowly. Her hands shook when she poured coffee, and her breathing grew labored after climbing stairs. Martha took over more of the business, making decisions Dorothy used to make.
The old woman didn't fight it.
"You're ready," she said one morning. "More than ready. You see things I miss now." "What things?" Martha asked. "The railroad," Dorothy said. "You knew 6 months before I did that they were planning a spur through Copper Ridge. You bought up the land before prices doubled. That's vision." Martha had indeed seen the opportunity. She had cultivated a friendship with the railroad surveyor's wife, learning over tea and gossip that the company planned expansion. She bought parcels of seemingly worthless scrubland that became valuable overnight when the route was announced. The purchase made her wealthy in her own right, independent of Dorothy's fortune. It also made her powerful. The railroad needed her land, and she drove a hard bargain, extracting promises of jobs for local workers and fair rates for shipping. "You drive like a mule, Skinner," the railroad executive had complained. "I drive like someone who knows what she has," Martha had replied coolly. "Take it or build around me." They took it. Word of the negotiation spread. Other women started coming to Martha for advice on business matters, on property disputes, on contracts their husbands wanted them to sign. Martha helped them all, charging nothing but building a network of grateful allies. Claire became her closest friend and advisor. The two women met weekly to discuss the town's direction. Claire had found her voice since that night at the general store. Her husband Paul now consulted her on all major decisions, having learned that her judgment was often better than his. "We need to think about the future," Claire said one afternoon as they sat in Martha's office above the store. "Dorothy won't be here forever. When she's gone, the men are going to try to take back control. Martha had thought about this often. We need to make sure they can't. We need to own enough property, enough businesses, enough influence that they have no choice but to work with us." "How do we do that?" "The same way Dorothy did," Martha said. "We buy when others are desperate to sell. We loan money at fair rates so people owe us favors. We build relationships with the territorial government. We make ourselves indispensable." Claire nodded slowly. "That's going to take years." "We have years," Martha replied. But they had less time than they thought. Dorothy collapsed in the store on a cold November morning. Martha was at her side in seconds, calling for the doctor. "I'm fine," Dorothy gasped, but she wasn't. Her face was gray and sweat beaded on her forehead. The doctor arrived and examined her. His face was grave when he emerged from the bedroom. "Heart's giving out," he said quietly. "Could be days, could be months, but not long." Dorothy refused to stay in bed. She insisted on sitting in her chair by the window watching the street below. Martha brought her reports and read her letters, keeping her involved in every decision. "You don't need my approval anymore," Dorothy said one evening. "I know," Martha replied, "but I want it anyway." Dorothy smiled. "Good answer. Pride's important, but knowing when to listen to those who came before you is more important. Remember that when you're the old woman and some young thing is asking your opinion." "I will." "And remember this too," Dorothy said. "Power isn't about being feared. It's about being essential. Make yourself so valuable that people can't imagine running things without you. That's how you stay safe." Martha wrote down every lesson, filling notebook after notebook with Dorothy's wisdom. The old woman had fought too hard and learned too much for that knowledge to die with her. Dorothy Kane passed away on a Sunday morning in February. She died in her chair by the window looking out at the town she had helped build. Martha held her hand and felt the moment life left her body. The funeral was the largest Copper Ridge had ever seen. People came from 3 territories to pay respects. They told stories of Dorothy's fairness, her toughness, her unwavering commitment to justice. The preacher called her a pioneer and a saint. Martha stood by the grave and said nothing. She didn't trust herself to speak without breaking. Instead, she made a silent promise to the woman who had saved her life and taught her everything. She would continue Dorothy's work. She would build on what they had started together. She would make Copper Ridge into something Dorothy would be proud of. When the will was read, Martha inherited everything. The store, the boarding house, the mining shares, the railroad land, all of it. Dorothy had one final instruction: use it wisely and use it well. Martha was 24 years old and owned more than most men twice her age. The transition happened smoothly because she had been running things for months already. People were used to taking orders from her, used to bringing her their problems. But not everyone was happy. A rancher named Bill Curtis gathered a group of men at the saloon one night. They were angry that a young woman controlled so much of the town's wealth and influence. "It ain't natural," Curtis said, drunk and loud. "Women shouldn't have that kind of power." Word reached Martha within the hour. She appeared at the saloon door with Claire and 5 other women from the council. They walked in without hesitation and stood at the bar. "You got something to say to me, Bill?" Martha asked calmly. "This is a private meeting." "In a public saloon," Martha replied. "Speak your mind." Curtis looked at his friends for support but found none. They all remembered what happened to the Blackwells. They all knew Martha Collins wasn't someone to cross lightly. "I just think," Curtis said carefully, "that maybe you've taken on too much. Running all Dorothy's businesses plus your own land, it's a lot for one person." "It is a lot," Martha agreed. "That's why I'm hiring. I need a foreman for the boarding house, someone to manage the mining investments, and a clerk for the store. You interested in any of those jobs, Bill?" Curtis blinked. "Jobs? I'd pay fair wages," Martha said. "Better than most ranchers can afford. You'd be working for me, taking orders from me, but you'd also be making enough to buy your own spread in a few years if you're smart about it." The offer caught Curtis completely off guard. He had come expecting a fight and found opportunity instead. "I'll think about it," he mumbled. "You do that?" Martha said. "Offers open to any man here who wants honest work and honest pay. Come see me at the store tomorrow." She turned and walked out, the women following. Behind her, she heard confused murmuring. She had turned a confrontation into a recruitment drive, and the men didn't know how to respond. Claire laughed once they were outside. "That was brilliant." "That was necessary," Martha replied. "Dorothy taught me that angry men need to be given something to do. Idle hands make trouble. Put those same hands to productive work, and they become allies." By the end of the week, Bill Curtis and 3 others had accepted jobs. They worked hard, and Martha paid them well, exactly as promised. Within months, they were defending her against other critics. Martha's reputation grew beyond Copper Ridge. The territorial newspapers wrote about the young woman who had inherited a fortune and multiplied it. Some articles were admiring, others skeptical or openly hostile. She ignored them all and focused on building. She expanded the boarding house into a proper hotel. She brought in investors to develop the silver mines, taking a percentage of profits without risking her own capital. She convinced the territorial legislature to grant Copper Ridge town status, giving it legal authority to pass its own laws. Every decision strengthened her position. Every success made her more indispensable. She followed Dorothy's lessons perfectly, becoming so essential to Copper Ridge's prosperity that no one could challenge her without risking their own interests. Years passed. Martha turned 30, then 35. She never married, despite numerous proposals. She had no interest in sharing power or answering to a husband. She built her empire alone, surrounded by friends and allies, but ultimately independent. The Women's Council evolved into a true governing body. They established schools, a library, a hospital. They created laws protecting women's property rights and children's welfare. They built Copper Ridge into a model community, one that visiting legislators praised and other towns tried to emulate. Martha's appearance changed over the years. She dressed more formally, moving through town like visiting royalty. Her red hair grayed at the temples, but her eyes remained sharp. She carried herself with absolute confidence, the kind that came from decades of making difficult decisions and living with the consequences. People called her Miss Collins with respect that bordered on fear. They came to her to settle disputes, to ask permission for business ventures, to seek her blessing on marriages and partnerships. She became the unofficial but undeniable leader of Copper Ridge. Some resented her power. They called her arrogant, imperious, unwomanly. Martha didn't care. She had learned long ago that criticism from those who had never built anything meant nothing. Others recognized what she had accomplished. They saw how she had transformed a violent frontier town into a place where families could thrive, where women could own property and conduct business, where law meant something more than whoever had the most guns. At 40, Martha attended a territorial convention in Santa Fe. Governors and judges and wealthy businessmen filled the hall. She walked among them as an equal, discussing mining rights and railroad expansion and territorial politics. A senator from Washington pulled her aside. "You've built something remarkable in Copper Ridge, Miss Collins. Have you considered running for territorial office?" "No," Martha said simply. "I'm more useful where I am." "That's probably true," the senator admitted. "But it's a shame. The territory could use more leaders like you." Martha smiled but said nothing. She had no interest in official titles or public office. She had learned from Dorothy that real power was often exercised quietly, through influence rather than authority. She returned to Copper Ridge and continued her work. She established a bank, offering loans to farmers and ranchers at fair rates. She invested in irrigation projects that turned desert into farmland. She brought telephone lines to town and lobbied for better roads. Every project employed local workers. Every success shared prosperity broadly. Martha could have hoarded wealth and power, but instead chose to spread it strategically, creating a web of mutual dependence that strengthened her position while improving countless lives. At 50, Martha Collins was one of the wealthiest women in the territory. She owned property in 6 counties, held shares in dozens of businesses, and had influence that reached to the territorial capital and beyond. The desperate mail-order bride was long forgotten, replaced by a woman of formidable presence and iron will, but she never forgot where she came from. She kept Dorothy's revolver in her desk drawer. She maintained the Women's Council and ensured new generations were trained in the arts of business and negotiation. She told her story to young women who arrived in Copper Ridge seeking opportunity, emphasizing that power was earned through intelligence and persistence, not granted by men's permission. The railroad executive who had once complained about her negotiating tactics returned to Copper Ridge for a business meeting. He barely recognized the elegant woman who welcomed him to her office. "You've done well for yourself, Miss Collins," he said. "I've done what was necessary," Martha replied. "Now, shall we discuss the expansion of rail service to the northern mines?" They negotiated for hours, and Martha got everything she wanted. The executive left, shaking his head in admiration and frustration. "You're the toughest businessman I've ever met," he said. "And I mean that as a compliment." "Good," Martha said, "because I take it as one." Martha Collins turned 64 on a spring morning that smelled of rain and sage. She sat in her office, above what was now Collins Mercantile, looking down at the street where Henry Blackwell had once held a gun to her head. That moment felt like something from another life, something that had happened to a different person entirely. Claire knocked and entered without waiting for permission. She was 61 now, her hair gray but her mind sharp as ever. She had become Martha's partner in the truest sense, running many of the business operations while Martha focused on larger strategic decisions. "The mayor wants to name the new library after you," Claire said. Martha waved dismissively. "Absolutely not. Name it after Dorothy." "It's already named after Dorothy. This would be the second library." "We're building a second library?" "You approved the plans 3 weeks ago," Claire said with amusement. "You've been distracted." Martha smiled. "I have been, haven't I?" She had reason to be distracted. The territorial governor had privately asked her to help shape policy on women's property rights for potential statehood. The conversation wasn't official yet, but Martha knew it would lead to legislative change that affected the entire territory. "Speaking of distracted," Claire continued, "there's a young woman downstairs who arrived on the morning stage. She's asking for work." "Send her to Bill," Martha said. Bill Curtis had become her chief of operations, managing hiring across all her businesses. "She specifically asked for you," Claire said. "Says her name is Grace Mitchell. She's from Ohio and came west on a work contract. The man who hired her turned out to be running a brothel." She ran. Martha set down her pen. "How old? 19? Maybe 20? The same age Martha had been when she arrived. Martha stood and straightened her dress, a habit from decades of meeting people in formal circumstances. "Send her up," Martha said. Grace Mitchell was thin and exhausted, wearing a dress that had once been fine but was now stained with travel. She had dark hair and intelligent eyes that reminded Martha of herself at that age. The girl carried a small bag and held herself with the careful dignity of someone trying not to show fear. "Sit," Martha said, gesturing to a chair. Grace sat on the edge, back straight. "Miss Collins, I need work. I can read and write. I'm good with numbers. I worked in my father's store before he died." "Why did you come west?" Martha asked. Grace hesitated. "The agency said I could work in a hotel in Denver. When I arrived, the man said the hotel was actually a different kind of establishment. I refused. He said I owed him for passage and room and board. I left anyway. You know he'll look for you." "I know," Grace said quietly. "But I'd rather die than work in a brothel." Martha studied the girl for a long moment. She saw desperation and determination in equal measure. She saw someone who had bet everything on the hope of a better life and was now trapped by circumstance in debt. "The debt isn't legal," Martha said. "Contracts that involve prostitution are void under territorial law. If he finds you and tries to enforce it, I'll have the sheriff arrest him." Grace's eyes widened.
"You can do that?"
"I can," Martha said simply. "I've done it before. Men like that prey on women with no resources and no knowledge of the law. They rely on fear to maintain control. Take away the fear and they have nothing. So I'm safe." "You're safe," Martha confirmed. "Now, can you actually keep books, or were you just saying that?" Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a worn ledger. "This was from my father's store. I kept it for 3 years before he died." Martha opened the ledger and examined the entries. The handwriting was neat, the calculations accurate, the organization logical. "Good work," Martha said, closing the book. "I'll start you at $30 a month plus room and board. You'll help manage the hotel accounts and assist with other business records as needed. After 6 months, if you prove capable, we'll discuss a raise and more responsibility." Then tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet," Martha said. "I'm not easy to work for, and I expect perfection. Make a mistake and I'll let you know immediately. But work hard and learn fast, and there's no limit to what you can accomplish here." Grace nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'll work harder than anyone." "I believe you," Martha said. "Claire will show you to a room and get you settled. Start tomorrow morning at 7. After Grace left, Claire returned with a knowing smile. "Reminded you of someone?" "Yes," Martha admitted. "Though I had Dorothy to protect me. Grace only has herself." "She has you now," Claire pointed out. "She has herself," Martha corrected. "I'm just providing an opportunity. What she does with it is up to her." But over the following months, Martha found herself taking special interest in Grace's development. The girl was everything she had promised and more. She learned quickly, asked intelligent questions, and showed initiative without overstepping. Martha began training Grace the same way Dorothy had trained her, teaching lessons about business, negotiation, and power. Grace absorbed everything with the hunger of someone who knew opportunity was rare and precious. "Why are you doing this?" Grace asked one evening as they reviewed contracts. "Because someone did it for me," Martha said. "And because talented women are wasted if they're not given the tools to build something." Grace became Martha's protégé and eventually her right hand. She had a gift for seeing patterns in numbers and predicting market trends. Within 2 years, she was managing major business decisions. Within 5 years, Martha gave her a percentage stake in the Mercantile and Hotel. The parallels to Martha's own story weren't lost on anyone in Copper Ridge. People called Grace Young Martha and whispered that history was repeating itself. Martha discouraged such talk. Grace wasn't her, and the times were different. But she couldn't deny that Grace represented the future, in the same way Martha had once represented possibility. At 60, Martha began thinking seriously about succession. She was still healthy and sharp, but she had watched Dorothy wait too long to plan for transition. She wouldn't make the same mistake. She called a meeting of the Women's Council, now numbering 30 members, ranging from business owners to teachers to the town's first female doctor. "I'm not dying," Martha said bluntly, But I'm not going to live forever either. We need to talk about what happens after I'm gone. Nothing happens, Claire said. You've built systems that run themselves. The businesses have managers, the town has laws and leadership. You've made yourself replaceable, which was the smartest thing you ever did. Systems can fail, Martha replied. They need someone who understands why they were built and how to protect them. Grace is capable, but she's young. She needs another decade of experience. Then give her that decade, another councilwoman suggested. Step back gradually. Let her make major decisions with your guidance. When you're gone, she'll be ready. Martha nodded slowly. It was the right approach, though it meant acknowledging her own mortality in a way she found uncomfortable. The transition began subtly. Martha allowed Grace to negotiate contracts while she observed. She let Grace make investment decisions and deal with the consequences, intervening only when catastrophe loomed. She introduced Grace to her network of contacts across the territory, establishing relationships that would outlast Martha's life. Grace handled it all with remarkable composure. She made mistakes, as everyone did, but learned from them quickly. She developed her own style of leadership, similar to Martha's, but uniquely her own. Where Martha was direct and sometimes blunt, Grace had a gift for diplomacy that smoothed over conflicts before they escalated. You're better at this than I was at your age, Martha told her one afternoon. I had a better teacher, Grace replied. Dorothy was a better teacher than I am. But you're the one who was here when I needed someone. Martha felt a surge of pride mixed with melancholy. This was what Dorothy must have felt, watching Martha grow into power and knowing that life was a cycle of teaching and learning, building and passing on. The territory achieved statehood when Martha was 62. It was a moment of celebration and change. New laws were written, new officials elected, new opportunities created. The women's property rights legislation Martha had helped shape became part of the state constitution, protecting generations of women who would never know her name. Copper Ridge flourished in the early years of statehood. The railroad brought tourists and commerce. The mines produced steady wealth, the farms fed growing populations. The town Martha had helped build became prosperous and stable, a place where families raised children and businesses thrived. Martha's health remained strong, but she slowed down. She walked with a cane after a fall left her with a permanent limp. Her eyesight weakened, requiring spectacles for reading. She spent more time in her office and less time traveling, content to manage affairs from her desk. She became a living legend, the old woman who had transformed Copper Ridge through sheer determination and intelligence. Young women sought her out for advice. Historians came to interview her about the early days. The governor himself visited, thanking her personally for her contributions to the state. Through it all, Martha remained focused on the work. She fine-tuned her businesses, adjusted strategies, prepared for economic changes she could see coming but others missed. She never stopped thinking 3 moves ahead, never stopped planning for contingencies. Grace turned 30 and had become as formidable as Martha at that age. She ran the day-to-day operations of the business empire while Martha handled strategic planning. They worked together seamlessly, understanding each other's thoughts without needing to speak them. I'm making you an equal partner, Martha announced one morning. Grace looked up from the papers she was reviewing. What? 50-50 split of everything? Martha said. You've earned it. More importantly, the transition needs to be complete before I die, not after. That way, there's no question about succession, no legal challenges, no instability. Martha, I can't accept that. Yes, you can, Martha said firmly. This is how it works. Dorothy did it for me. I'm doing it for you. Someday you'll do it for someone else. That's how we build something that lasts beyond any single person. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank me by continuing what we started, Martha said. Keep the Women's Council strong. Protect the laws we fought for. Make sure no girl ever has to face what you and I faced when we arrived here. I will, Grace promised. The partnership was formalized legally and announced publicly. Some grumbled that Martha was giving away her fortune to someone with no family connection, but most understood. Grace had proven herself over 8 years. She was the natural successor. Martha Collins reached 64 years old on a morning that felt like every other morning and yet fundamentally different. She was exactly the age Dorothy had been when Martha first met her, a symmetry that wasn't lost on her. She stood at her window, looking down at Copper Ridge's main street. The town had grown enormously since that day 45 years ago when she had stepped off the stagecoach in terror. Buildings stretched farther than she could see. Automobiles mingled with horses on widened roads. Electric lights hung from poles that hadn't existed when she arrived. But some things hadn't changed. The Women's Council still met weekly. The mercantile still served as an informal courthouse where people brought their disputes. The spirit of cooperation and mutual support that Dorothy had insisted on still guided the community. Martha thought about the gun at her temple, Henry Blackwell's threats, the fear that had nearly paralyzed her. She thought about Dorothy's intervention and all the lessons that followed. She thought about every decision, every risk, every victory and defeat that had brought her to this moment. She had built an empire from nothing but intelligence and determination. She had transformed a frontier town into a model community. She had given opportunities to countless women who had none. She had lived a life that mattered, that changed things, that would echo forward long after she was gone. Grace knocked and entered. The morning reports are ready. Martha turned from the window. Let's review them. They sat together at the large desk, going through accounts and contracts and correspondence. Grace pointed out a potential problem with a supplier. Martha suggested a solution that turned the problem into an advantage. They worked in comfortable synchronization, building today's decisions on yesterday's foundation. At noon, Claire arrived with lunch. The three women ate together, discussing town business and upcoming council meetings. They talked about a proposal to build a hospital, about changes to school curriculum, about the need for better roads to the northern farms. These were the conversations that mattered, Martha thought. Not the dramatic confrontations or bold gambits, but the steady, patient work of making life better for ordinary people. This was power's true purpose, not domination but service, not control but creation. After lunch, Martha returned to the window. She looked out at her town, her empire, her life's work. She thought about Dorothy Kane and wondered if the old woman would be proud of what Martha had accomplished. She decided Dorothy would be proud but wouldn't say so. She would just nod and say, "That's good work, girl. Now what's next?" Martha smiled at the imagined response. That had always been Dorothy's way. Acknowledge success briefly, then immediately focus on the future. Never rest, never become complacent, never stop building. Grace joined her at the window.
Thinking about Dorothy?
Always, Martha said. She made all of this possible. You made it real, Grace replied. Dorothy gave you tools. You used them to build something bigger than even she imagined. We built it together, Martha corrected. You, me, Claire, every woman who stood up when it mattered. This isn't my empire. It's ours. But you're the one who held it together, Grace insisted. You're the one who made the hard decisions and lived with the consequences. You're the one people respect and fear and trust. That's not collective, that's you. Martha considered this. There was truth in it, though. She didn't like admitting it. She had become what Dorothy intended, a person of power who used that power wisely. She had learned to walk the line between strength and ruthlessness, between leadership and tyranny. The secret, Martha said slowly, is that it was never about me. Every decision I made was about protecting what we built together. The day I start thinking my power is personal rather than positional is the day I should step down. You're not stepping down, Grace said firmly.
Not yet, Martha.
But eventually, maybe sooner than you think. Don't say that. Martha turned to face her protege. Grace, I'm 64 years old. I've lived longer than I expected and accomplished more than I dreamed. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid of leaving work unfinished. Is it finished? Grace asked quietly. No, Martha said. It's never finished. But it's stable enough to survive without me. You'll continue it. Someone after you will continue it. That's how great things work. They outlast their creators. Grace wiped her eyes. I'll miss you. I'm not dead yet, Martha said with amusement. I might have another decade in me, but when I go, you can't mourn too long. There's too much work to do. Dorothy said something like that to you, didn't she? Word for word, Martha confirmed. Some lessons are too important not to repeat. They stood together at the window, watching Copper Ridge go about its business. Children played in the street. Women walked to shops alone and unafraid. Men worked alongside women as equals. It wasn't perfect, no place ever was, but it was profoundly better than what Martha had found 45 years ago. Evening came softly to Copper Ridge. Martha sat in her chair, the same chair Dorothy had died in, and watched the sunset paint the desert gold and crimson. Grace was downstairs closing the store.
Claire had gone home to her family. The building was quiet except for the sound of Martha's breathing.
She thought about the scared girl who had arrived here with nothing. She thought about the woman she had become through necessity and opportunity. She thought about Dorothy's lessons and how they had shaped everything Martha built. Most of all, she thought about the secret. The real secret of her success, the thing she had never spoken aloud because words diminished it. The secret was simple. She had refused to be small. When men tried to make her afraid, she chose courage. When circumstances tried to break her, she chose strength. When convention told her women couldn't hold power, she took it anyway and dared anyone to take it back. That was the secret Dorothy had taught her. Power wasn't given. It was seized and defended and used. Women could hold it as well as men, maybe better, if they were willing to be ruthless when necessary and kind when possible. Martha had been both ruthless and kind over 45 years. She had destroyed men who threatened her community and lifted up women who showed promise. She had made herself indispensable and feared and respected, using all three to build something that would outlast her. Now, at 64, she was exactly what the townspeople called her behind her back, the Queen of Copper Ridge. Not a title, she claimed, but one she had earned through decades of smart decisions and hard work. She ruled not through force but through competence, not through fear but through the recognition that everyone prospered when she prospered. And when she died, whether in a month or a decade, Grace would take her place. Then someone after Grace, an unbroken line of strong women holding power and using it wisely, protecting what Dorothy had started all those years ago. That was Martha Collins's legacy. Not money or property, though she had both. Not fame or recognition, though she had achieved those too. Her legacy was the example she set and the system she built, proving that women could lead as well as men when given the chance. The last light faded from the sky. Martha stood slowly, her joints protesting. She walked to her bedroom, each step measured and careful. She was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the day's work. It was the tiredness of a life fully lived, of battles fought and mostly won. She undressed and lay down in her bed. Through the window she could see stars emerging in the darkening sky. The same stars that had hung over Copper Ridge when she arrived, that would hang over it long after she was gone. Martha Collins, who had come west as a desperate 19-year-old mail-order bride and became the most powerful person in 3 counties, closed her eyes and smiled. She had lived the life Dorothy Kane had made possible. She had taken that gift and multiplied it 100-fold. Tomorrow she would wake and continue the work. There were always deals to make, people to help, systems to refine. The work was never done, and that was exactly how she wanted it. But tonight, just for a moment, Martha allowed herself to rest. She had earned that much. She had earned everything.